It's the Donald Trump end of democracy clearance sale.
Dumbass. Dumbass.
At our core, a democracy. And yet, history tells us the blind loyalty to a single leader and a willingness to engage in political violence is fatal to democracy.
And if Trump wins, worst case scenario, that after 250 years of modern democracy, more or less, that we're coming to an end to that.
I love this city. I don't want to destroy it. Donald Trump wants to destroy not only the city, but the country, and eventually he could destroy the world. I don't mean to scare you. No, wait, maybe I do mean to scare you. If Trump returns to the White House, you can kiss these freedoms goodbye that we all take for granted.
I totally agree with Robert De Niro. I am one of those people that suffer from Trump derangement syndrome. I think he is a threat to democracy.
Excuse me? Excuse me? Excuse me?
And Twitter made the decision, number one, to prevent users, any user, from sharing those stories. And number two, you went even further and blocked the New York Post from sharing on Twitter its own reporting. Why did Twitter make the decision to censor the New York Post?
We had a hack materials policy that we...
When was that policy adopted?
In 2018, I believe.
In 2018, go ahead. What was the policy?
So the policy is around limiting the spread of materials that are hacked. We didn't want Twitter to be a distributor for hack materials. We found that the New York Post, because it showed the direct materials, screenshots of the direct materials, and it was unclear how those were attained, that it fell under this policy. Now,
so in your view, if it's unclear the source of a document, and in this instance, the New York Post documented what it said the source was, which it said it was a laptop owned by Hunter Biden that had been turned into a repair store. So they weren't hiding what they claimed to be the source. Is it your position that Twitter, when you can't tell the source, blocks press stories?
No, not at all. Our team made a fast decision. The enforcement action, however, of blocking URLs, both in tweets and in DM, in direct messages, we believe was incorrect.
Let me ask you something. You claimed it was because of a hacked materials policy. I find that facially highly dubious and clearly employed in a deeply partial way. Did Twitter block the distribution of the New York Times' story a few weeks ago that purported to be based on copies of President Trump's tax returns?
We didn't find that a violation of our terms of service and this policy in particular because it was reporting about the material. It wasn't distributing the material.
Okay, well, that's actually not true. They posted what they purported to be original source materials, and federal law, federal statute makes it a crime, a federal felony, to distribute someone's tax returns against their knowledge. So that material was based on something that was distributed in violation of federal law, and yet Twitter gleefully allowed people to circulate that. But when the article was critical of Joe Biden, Twitter engaged in rampant censorship and silencing.
I believe the Republicans have called this hearing in order to support a false narrative fabricated by the president to help his re-election prospects.
The latest Twitter controversy and the alleged decision by the company to downplay tweets promoting a news article that was potentially damaging to the Biden presidential campaign. Was there an impact on the outcome of the election? That is the central question swirling around the Twitter files. What Elon Musk is calling a series of tweets by an independent journalist late last Friday. Correspondent Kelly Meyer is live for us. So, Kelly, what do these tweets reveal?
Well, Nicole, the so-called Twitter files, as you said, raising some concerns from those on Capitol Hill. And now the man vying to be the next House Speaker is calling for an investigation into other big tech companies like Facebook and Google. The journalist alleging Twitter suppressed stories based on petitions from Democrats and Republicans, but favored Democrats. The Twitter files also aiming to draw a connection between the treatment of the Biden campaign by some at Twitter. One tweet reading, one executive would write to another, quote, more to review from the Biden team. The reply would come back, quote, handled. Today, the White House responding to the Twitter files, calling them a diversion from internal struggles.
We see this as an interesting or a coincidence, if I may, that he would so haphazardly, Twitter would so haphazardly push this distraction. That is a full of old news, if you think about it.
Let's turn your attention now to the latest at Twitter headquarters in San Francisco. Today, recently fired janitors protested outside the building, and it comes as the social media platform faces separate allegations of collusion and censorship. ABC 7 News reporter Suzanne Fawn has the story.
This is against big tech and its collusion with the government.
Conservative speaker and attorney Rogan O'Hanley says he was unfairly suspended from Twitter back in February 2021 for election misinformation. O'Hanley shows us the first tweet he shared and his comment on the 2020 election.
I said election fraud is rampant nationwide, especially in California. There's no voter ID here. And so I said we need to conduct audits.
Twitter suspended O'Hanley after his fifth strike. His lawsuit against Twitter, the California Secretary of State, and others was dismissed. So he took it to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals today. Now he waits for a decision.
I want my Twitter profile restored, and I want tens of thousands of other Twitter profiles restored that were unrightfully suspended by Twitter, potentially in collusion with the government. We need to see how deep this goes.
It's not the government's job to be the policeman for Twitter.
New York Post had this alleged information and was trying to publish it without any corroboration, without any backup information. They were trying to publish it to Twitter. Twitter did not let them, and now they were upset. I believe that political operatives who sought to inject explosive disinformation with the Washington Post couldn't get away with it. And now they're livid. And they want the ability to do it again.
Mr. Schellenberger, you are recognized for your opening statement.
Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Plaskett, members of the committee, thank you very much for inviting my testimony. In his 1961 farewell address, President Dwight Eisenhower warned of, quote, the acquisition of unwarranted influence by the military-industrial complex. Eisenhower feared that the size and power of the complex or cluster of government contractors in the Defense Department would, quote, endanger our liberties or democratic processes. How did he mean that? Through, quote, domination of the nation's scholars by federal employment, project allocations, and the power of money. He feared public policy would become the captive of a scientific, technological elite. Eisenhower's fears were well-founded. Today, American taxpayers are unwittingly financing the growth and power of a censorship industrial complex run by America's scientific and technological elite, which endangers our liberties and democracy. I'm grateful for this opportunity to offer this testimony and sound the alarm over the shocking and disturbing emergence of state-sponsored censorship in the United States of America. The Twitter files, state attorneys general lawsuits, and investigative reporters have revealed a large and growing network of government agencies, academic institutions, and non-governmental organizations that are actively censoring American citizens, often without their knowledge, on a range of issues. I do not know how much of the censorship is coordinated beyond what we have been able to document, and I will not speculate. I recognize that the law allows Facebook, Twitter, and other private companies to moderate content on their platforms, and I support the right of governments to communicate with the public, including to dispute inaccurate information. But government officials have been caught repeatedly pushing social media platforms to censor disfavored users and content. Often these acts of censorship threaten the legal protection social media companies need to exist, Section 230. If government officials are directing or facilitating such censorship, notes one law professor, it raises serious First Amendment questions. It is axiomatic that the government cannot do indirectly what it is prohibited from doing directly. Moreover, we know that the U.S. government has funded organizations that pressure advertisers to boycott news media organizations and social media platforms that refuse to censor and/or spread disinformation, including alleged conspiracy theories. The Stanford Internet Observatory, the University of Washington,
the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Research Lab, and Graphica have all inadequately disclosed ties to the Department of Defense, the CIA, and other intelligence agencies. They work with multiple U.S. government agencies to institutionalize censorship research and advocacy within dozens of other universities and think tanks. It is important to understand how these groups function. They are not publicly engaging with their opponents in an open exchange of ideas. They aren't asking for a national debate over the limits of the First Amendment. Rather, they are creating blacklists of disfavored people and then pressuring, cajoling, and demanding that social media platforms censor, de-amplify, and even ban the people on those lists.
I think that, you have to take a step back and acknowledge what the reality is about how the FBI has been interacting with this. And just look at January 6th itself, for example, right? It's not as though the FBI has been going in and saying, hey, take down this post, hey, take down this post. That's what they're alleging, but there's just not a lot of evidence to support that.
Bullshit detected. Take precautions.
This opinion, this 155-page opinion, starts off with essentially a big if true comment. It says, okay, if these things are true, this is one of the biggest First Amendment abuses in American history. And I suppose so, if it were true, but that's not necessarily where the facts are lining up with and what exactly the evidence shows that social media companies, how they were interacting with at least the FBI.
There was pervasive evidence of direct contact between the FBI and other agencies asking for content takedowns on matters that were political parodies about the election and other things. Obviously, we famously have tons of former law enforcement, top national security officials saying that the laptop is misinformation, and then there's so much, again, they're just claiming these things don't exist. And then it's not just the FBI, I don't mean to just pick on them. It's the CDC, it's the agency. Again, how do you get around, this is an email from Rob Flaherty, Deputy Assistant to the President, President Joe Biden, that says, on this parody account linked to Finnegan Biden, Hunter Biden's daughter, President Biden's granddaughter, it says, cannot stress the degree to which this needs to be resolved immediately. Please remove this count immediately. It was suspended 45 minutes later.
Moreover, I'm looking at this Jackman article. I had forgotten about this, that the FBI pressured Twitter to relax its privacy standards and hand over more user information. It asked executives if they would revise their terms of service to effectively allow intelligence agencies to scoop up open source data more easily. They said no, to their credit. And if they'd share information about accounts using VPNs, which are used to mask online activity, that is a broad.
Big if true. It's true. It's true. We know it's true.
It has been almost 1 year since the first bombshell Twitter files. Looking back now, and my questions are for Mr. Taibbi and Mr. Schellenberger, what was the most alarming thing that you came across during your review of internal Twitter documents? And I have a number of follow-up questions, so keep it short.
Sure. Thank you for the question. I think the most alarming thing that we saw was the regular stream, organized stream of communication between the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, and the largest tech companies in the country. They had an organized system for flagging content, not occasionally, but in enormous numbers, involving spreadsheets of accounts that ran to the hundreds and thousands. And this was shocking to us, and to the Congressman's point, this isn't crazy conspiracy theory. We've already had 4 federal judges rule that they believe this activity violates the First Amendment. This is quite serious. We didn't know whether it was against the law, but we certainly thought it was shocking enough to be in the public interest, and that for me was the most serious thing.
These content moderators at social media platforms like Twitter wield an enormous amount of power in terms of determining not only what Americans can say, but also what Americans can see. Do you believe, Mr. Taibbi and Mr. Schellenberg, that it's appropriate for unelected bureaucrats or these tech companies to collude to influence what Americans can say or read?
Absolutely not. And, I wanted to stress again that all this was happening secretively with the blessing of the Department of Homeland Security, with them sending things to, this is from the EIP at Stanford to Twitter and Facebook saying, we repeat our recommendations that this account be suspended. We recommend labeling all instances of this article. We recommend that you flag as false this. All these demands being made secretly without any public review. My view is that the government doesn't decide who can speak in the town square. Why should the government be deciding who can speak on social media platforms? We, the people, should decide our own content as adults, legal content. It should not be decided by either government or big tech.
And Mr. Taibbi and Mr. Schellenberg, do you believe that this censorship is a form of election interference?
Absolutely it is. There's no question in my mind. Mr.
Taibbi?
Yes, I think it certainly can be. That was actually the reason the whistleblower came forward. The people involved, one of the quote was, they assumed everyone who was smart thought the way they did. They talked about the potential election of Donald Trump being an end-of-the-world event. They talk about the wackadoodles who actually watch Fox News. And, even as somebody who doesn't vote for Republicans, it was shocking to me to see this. And I think this was a consistent theme of not just the CTI League, but most of the censorship organizations that we looked at. They all tend to drift in one direction.
I don't think it's hyperbolic to say this genuinely could be the last Democratic election we ever have.
You're right.
Listen to what he says. He's telling you dictators aren't a dictator for one day, and then it's let the people decide.
No, and I'm going to tell you, as vice president, I've now met with over 150 world leaders, presidents, prime ministers, chancellors, and kings. And in the last 3 international trips I've taken, which are, going back to the end of last year through this year, world leaders have come up to me expressing their real concern.
Please, continue.
Well, the Supreme Court had a big day yesterday, and not just with respect to former President Donald Trump. The bench ordered lower courts to further review a pair of 2021 laws from Florida and Texas that blocked social media sites from banning political candidates. The laws claimed that conservative voices have been unfairly censored by tech companies. The court's opinion said that actually both lower courts messed it up and that their analysis of the First Amendment challenges to the law were wrong.
Yesterday's ruling received strong reactions from free speech organizations. One of those organizations, FIRE, reacted to the news, writing on X, "Should the government have the power to dictate the opinions you see on social media? If you said hell no, then we've got good news. The Supreme Court agrees." That's a big win for free speech and a free internet. Today's opinion makes clear there's no social media exception to the First Amendment. The government can't dictate what post must be seen on X or Facebook any more than it can dictate what op-eds run in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. Chris Marchese, director of NetChoice, said in the last 15 hours, NetChoice secured 4 victories in 4 different lawsuits against 4 different states. The decisions prevent the government from controlling the internet's marketplace of ideas or access to it. To give government that power, warns the Supreme Court, is to enable it to control the expression of ideas. Thankfully, that is what the First Amendment protects all of us from. And a senior fellow at the Cato Institute, Jennifer Huddleston, wrote on X, while the holding of the court's decision today focuses on procedural matters, the majority opinion particularly indicates a strong understanding of the impact that these laws could have on the First Amendment rights of platforms to engage in content moderation.
The reality is we have so many of these fights about the First Amendment now because our country has become very tribalized and very unwilling to accept that people can say things we don't like. I mean, social media in many ways is the kid nobody likes. Democrats have problems with it because Elon Musk owns it now. Republicans, and in Florida, Ron DeSantis has gone to war with companies that say things he disagrees with. And this is a reminder of why the Founding Fathers took so seriously and wrote so clearly express protections for speech. Because as is often driven into the ground, it doesn't protect speech you agree with, it protects speech you disagree with. And we find that if you can build a big enough tribe, as DeSantis did in Florida, you can try and curtail speech. What's surprising to me is that they overstepped so far that even this conservative court had to say that your argument on its face doesn't make any sense.
And on the Democratic and liberal side, I mean, I hear so much hand-wringing these days about misinformation, the spread of misinformation on social media. It's like, okay, but then you start looking at the studies that show it's really a small number of people on social media who are perpetually spreading and fooled by outright false information. Is the media literacy all that much worse on social media than it was in other organizations? No. A lot of the claims about interference and from foreign interference and bots and everything always end up being sensational claims are made, and then later you look at it and go, actually, this was a very tiny number of accounts that were not targeted in the right way. It seems like there's been a lot of hysteria on the subject.
Well, there's also a lot of nostalgizing for the time before. I mean, Democrats had no problem with social media when in 2008 Barack Obama utilized it to make a revolution in how we communicated.
They were proud of it. They bragged about it.
And it was worth being proud of. I mean, Democrats had a massive advantage on social media for almost a decade and a half before Republicans figured out how to use the Twitters.
We do turn now to a story breaking overnight. Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg claims he was pressured by the White House to censor content related to COVID-19 during the pandemic. Aaron Katersky joins us now with details. Aaron, good morning.
Good morning to you, Whit. For years, critics have taken aim at Facebook for silencing views that challenge the general consensus in the medical community, especially about the origin of COVID-19. Now, Facebook's founder surprisingly says they're right. This morning, Meta chief Mark Zuckerberg admitting he bowed to pressure from the Biden administration to censor content. The Facebook founder issuing a letter to the House Judiciary Committee that said senior administration officials pushed the social media platform to censor posts about COVID-19 and expressed a lot of frustration when the company resisted. Zuckerberg saying, "I believe the government pressure was wrong, and I regret that we were not more outspoken about it." Adding, "I feel strongly that we should not compromise our content standards due to pressure from any administration in either direction, and we're ready to push back if something like this happens again." Zuckerberg going on to express regret for demoting content related to corruption allegations against Hunter Biden ahead of the 2020 election, alleging the FBI warned information circulating online was a Russian disinformation operation. It's since been made clear that the reporting was not Russian disinformation, and in retrospect, we shouldn't have demoted the story. Zuckerberg went on to say the company has changed its policies and processes to make sure it doesn't happen again. House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jim Jordan celebrating the letter, calling it a big win for free speech. Zuckerberg's letter first appeared in the Wall Street Journal, and Whit, there really is a tension going on here between the government and big tech over how content on social media should be policed and whether conservative voices often get silenced.
Absolutely. The story getting a lot of attention this morning. Aaron, thank you.
Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Facebook's parent company, now says he regrets agreeing to requests from the Biden administration to censor content related to COVID-19. In a letter to the House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jim Jordan, Zuckerberg wrote this, quote, "In 2021, senior officials from the Biden administration, including the White House, repeatedly pressured our team for months to censor certain COVID-19 content, including humor and satire, and expressed a lot of frustration with our teams when we didn't agree. I believe the government pressure was wrong, and I regret that we were not more outspoken about it." Zuckerberg went on to say Facebook should not have temporarily demoted an article from the New York Post reporting on allegations of corruption in the Biden family in the lead up to the 2020 election. The panel's back. We're also joined by CNN media analyst Sarah Fisher. Sarah, good morning. Wonderful to have you. Thanks for jumping in on this story. I think what Zuckerberg has done here is fascinating. It's not something we've heard from him in this kind of direct way before. What is going on here, and what does it mean for future elections or issues like this?
This is a huge deal. You'll recall Republicans from 2 states sued. They went all through a huge court battle, basically alleging that the government overreached. They lost that court case, but we never heard from Facebook. We never heard from Meta. So we didn't know how they felt about the issue. This is the first time now. And them coming out and saying, look, this was a big deal. We don't agree with these policies. It sets a precedent moving forward that if any government official, if the White House were to pressure them again, we now know where they stand, and hopefully they now feel empowered to push back.
What are the politics behind this? I mean, clearly Zuckerberg is being influenced by a wide variety of factors. Sending this letter to Jim Jordan, did he feel like he had to do it? Why now?
Because ahead of the election, they're going to face a lot of content moderation issues. Even though they don't want to be involved in politics and news anymore, inevitably they are. And so if there is going to be an 11th hour issue like the New York Post story, and Facebook were to make the wrong call, they want everyone in Congress, particularly Republicans, to know that their intent here is not to be picking one side, that they're doing what they think is best for the health of the platform. But if he didn't speak up about the White House pressure now, no one would have believed them then.
Mark Preston, what do you see here? If you have a question for Sarah too, I'd be interested in kind of like how you spend a lot of your time thinking about how we as a news organization here at CNN are going to cover these elections, cover politics. It can be really, really tricky, and Facebook, now Meta, was at the center of this.
God, I hate walking the center line again, but I agree with Mark Zuckerberg. No, I agree. I mean, the idea that we have to protect free speech is critical to our democracy, no question about that. we still haven't been able to handle how do we slow the disinformation so as people don't get wrong information. The government clearly didn't do it the right way, but there needs to be a way. It's just we haven't figured it out yet.
The way, by the way, is transparency. And that's what I think a lot of government officials are starting to lean into. Facebook can make all the content moderation decisions in the world. We want to know how their algorithms work and why they're making them, and then we can hold them accountable to the decision whether it's right or wrong. We didn't have a lot of those transparency measures in place. It was the 2020 election, and quite frankly, the New York Post story that has now forced a lot of tech companies to be more forthcoming around how they make these decisions.
Social media have been called upon to censor hate speech, and they've tried to do so, but with no more success than any other attempt at censoring hate speech by governments throughout history and around the world. Hate speech is not a recognized legal concept in the United States, which is why I use the air quote. That said, speech that conveys a hateful message, along with speech that conveys any message, may in a particular context be punished if it directly causes specific, imminent, serious harm. Many people are surprised to learn that the First Amendment only applies to government. So social media literally have their own free speech rights to decide that certain voices and messages should be excluded from their platforms. I understand the moral satisfaction of calling for suppressing ideas that we hate, but experience shows that censorship does more harm than good. A more effective response to any idea we hate or consider hateful or dangerous is not to silence it, but to refute it, to explain why. What is the lesser of two evils? Would we rather trust ourselves and our fellow citizens to ignore and rebut messages that are hateful, or would we rather trust either government officials or powerful corporate entities to take those decisions away from us? I'd say the lesser of two evils is making our own decisions.
Both sides of the aisle, my friends too, are outraged about any kind of censorship.
Right.
And
Well,
we're talking about free speech. We're talking about a free market.
Right.
And it's, if it can happen once, it happens, then it's going to happen to you eventually. It's always going to happen to the other side eventually. That's what I'm talking. And our site, if we as a people just have wind up having this silent assent to it over, a period of time, then we get used to it. Mm-hmm. And the next thing you know, we say, where did our freedoms go?
Well, it's very interesting because Mark Zuckerberg is out there this week saying we were pressured. This is him in writing saying we were pressured by the Biden administration during COVID. And we submitted, and we shouldn't have submitted. We should have been more skeptical on the things that they wanted us to censor. And we regret that, and we're not going to be doing that anymore. And at the same time, the Reagan, it's been a couple of clips that have gotten censored, but the paid promo to promote the movie, much in the same way we just showed the audience with the trailer, has been censored repeatedly. They said it was a mistake, and yet they continue doing it.
The reason it was censored and it was because it was an attempt to influence an election.
This is what they claimed.
That's what they said.
That's what they said. And my point is that you banning or censoring that is itself an attempt to influence an election by keeping information from or one side of information away from the American people.